Welcome back to another episode of Indie Book Nerds Podcast. We're your hosts, Jade Neoma.
And Morgan Christensen. Today, we're excited to welcome our first guest, Dietrich Stogner. Dietrich is a husband, father, and a U.S. Navy veteran who spent 7 years serving on submarines. Now, he is a freelance writer and the author of Frostbitten.
So, to give a brief introduction of Frostbitten, we have Tomas Greenleaf, who receives a harrowing first assignment. Become the lone guardian for the remote village deep in the unforgiving Arctic. Fighting nightmarish creatures from the ice and uncovering the forbidden past of his empire, Greenleaf's battles test his every limit. Now, we do want to give some brief content warnings for this book, just in case readers want to know. There is non-fatal violence against animals, body horror, amputation, and, of course, general violence.
Well, Dietrich, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And just to get us started with your questions, when did Frostbitten release, and how would you describe it in your own words?
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I've been really excited to join y'all. Frostbitten came out on November 28th of last year. And to describe it in my own, that I think that's every author's least favorite question is to, hey, this thing you worked for a year on, can you go ahead and sum it up in like 5 seconds for us real quick? But no, Frostbitten's about a soldier who is very certain of his place in the world. He is given an assignment that brings him into a community that sees things very differently, and he has to figure out why he was sent there. He doesn't know why. The people who were there don't know why he was sent there, and he has to figure out what's going on in this place in order to find his way back to where he wants to be. And it is a very, very rough environment. It is a very harsh environment, and he's surrounded by people who don't want him there. So that's about what we're looking at. So
That sounds
Super
awesome.
cool.
I
It's
definitely
on our
like all
team
the
now.
Yeah, I love all the horror elements definitely coming through just in the description. You're already getting a little spine tingle.
Well, Dietrich, what is your writing journey? Like, how did you become the writer you are today?
I think the first time that I knew I wanted to be a writer, I was 12 years old, and my dad was reading a book. Asked him what he was reading, and he said it was something called Christine by Stephen King. And I asked if I could read it, and he goes, "Absolutely not. You're way too young to read this." Which, I mean, immediately, of course, guaranteed that I was going to read it. So I stole the copy from his study while I was at work the next day, and I spent the whole day reading it. And by the time I was done, I just couldn't believe somebody got paid to do this. Like that just blew my little brain at the time. And I wanted to write stories ever since then. And I think, like a lot of us, that desire kind of ebbed and flowed over the years. And in 2011, I decided to take a swing at writing my first book. It was called 72 Hours. It was this neo noir mystery about two veterans searching for a missing girl, and everything went really, really well with it until it went really, really badly. So, about 2 months after I finished writing it, I went to a book convention where there were agents there that were accepting pitches. I pitched it to the first agent I talked to. The agent liked it, asked for the manuscript, and signed me like a month and a half later. She then pitched it to like two publishers, and the second one said yes. And so we had a contract. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, this is how writing works. Great. Awesome. This is what everybody's experience is like. Um, and then a few months later, the recession slammed into the publishing industry like a freight train, and both the agency and the publisher went Chapter 11. Um, and so suddenly I was back to square one. I had this book, it was done, it was edited, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I decided to publish it independently, to self publish it. And things were a lot different back in 2011. There were nowhere near as many resources. And I kind of just threw it out there into the world. I didn't do a lot of work marketing it or promoting it. And to my shock, it did very badly. It sold like 12 copies. I think my mom bought 10 of them. Um, and that was a really disillusioning experience. So for about 10 years, I kind of grappled with writer's block. But during the pandemic, like a lot of people, I think I decided to start digging back into writing again. And I started writing a fantasy novel called Resonant. And it came very, very easily. I built this entire world around it, and I finished it, and it was a whopping 240,000 words. And I thought, of course, not knowing much about the publishing industry at the time. I was like, oh, this is great. Everybody's going to want this. Yeah, nobody wants a 240,000 word book. Um, and so I started thinking about what I wanted to do with this series. And a friend of mine had the idea that since a big chunk of this doorstopper was world building, he said, what if you write some standalone stories set in this world? You know, two, three, four, whatever, however many you want, that help fill in those gaps that take place before Resonant and lead into that story. And I was like, all right, yeah, I could try that. And Frostbitten was the first one of those. And it was the first book in the series that actually came out.
Wow, that's awesome. So I what interests me is so you this is this long journey, right, that eventually led us to what is today Frostbitten. What is it that got your brain going on like Frostbitten itself? Like what got the hands on the keys and the words coming out? What was that inspiration?
So, one of my favorite books of all time, it's my favorite nonfiction book. I've read it 3 or 4 times. Is Into Thin Air by John Krakauer. If I don't know if either of you read it, but it is a story about a disastrous Everest expedition. And a huge way that Krakauer writes it is he alternates chapters, where every other chapter is him telling about his experiences up there because he was actually on that expedition, and then the alternating chapters are more the here's why this place is so dangerous. Here's the limited oxygen. And I remember being absolutely fascinated with the section on the cold. The fact that, when the wind chill, especially up near the peak, you're looking at temperatures of like 50, 60, 70 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, and how that was just lethal to be out in. And I started thinking about, I've been reading more fantasy lately, and a lot of fantasy really embraces the idea of how do we create a community in a unusual environment. And I started wondering and thinking about how a community would actually manage to thrive. What if they had to be there for some reason? Um, how would they survive? And I was doing more research, and I read about places in Antarctica that used to have seismic activity, and lava flow would break through to the surface. And I had this idea of a community that existed on the shores of this, that it was basically this very, very tiny sliver of habitable that they could survive in. What would that community look like? How would they relate to the larger nation they were part of? And the more I started thinking about it, the more I realized I wanted to tell a story set in that world.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely see how those inspirations led into the frigid Arctic and like just the difficulty of living in that kind of environment just
Mm-hmm.
in general. I know that you say that your people kind of survive on the shores with that river of molten rock that's holding back the ice. What was the most difficult part of creating and planning for how your people would navigate those harsh elements?
Um, Mostly it really came down to the more I read about, because there are a few places on Earth. I mimicked the climate of the area around Lehar after a place called the Antarctic Plateau, which is one of the coldest places on Earth. And the more I read about it, the more I realized, like, no, it'd be real hard to live there. And started to think about the things like, well, I mean, how do they feed themselves? Like, they can't grow food. There's not going to be a huge amount of animal life around there. Like, how do they actually sustain a community? My original idea for Lehar was that it was a decent sized city. And I realized very quickly there was zero chance of that. Like, this had to be like a 150, 200 person community at most. And even then, it would be a very difficult existence. So I had to do a lot of work, kind of researching how Inuit tribes and indigenous peoples tribes have survived in really, really frigid climates for so, so long, what they have done to thrive, to stay alive, and stuff like that. And really think about from the perspective of how do you adapt to that kind of environment, and even when you do adapt, what are the challenges that face everybody there? It was it was a lot of fun, kind of coming up with that. Um, but yeah, it definitely was challenging because I didn't want to cheat. I think that's always something that bugs me in books when the author doesn't fully commit to this idea. And I wanted to make it feel like Lehar was a hard place. Like the people who chose to live there were there because they loved this place. They were born here, but they never made any excuses about, no, this is a tough place to be.
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely.
What made you choose the elements of the book that you did?
I served in the Navy. I had a little bit of survival training, so I thought I had a grasp on what it was to try to survive out in a climate like that. And I actually got to talk to some really cool people. I talked to a researcher who'd spent 2 years at McMurdo Station down in Antarctica, um, and I learned I had no idea how rough that kind of environment was, what it does to the human body. I learned about really fascinating slash terrifying factors like something called paradoxical undressing, which is when you start getting hypothermia, your body is trying to conserve heat as much as possible. So it starts shutting off the blood flow to the capillaries in your arms and legs to force the blood into your chest to keep your organs nice and warm. But the problem is that capillaries are muscles, so they do get tired after a while. And if you're in that environment for too long, those capillaries will finally give way and relax. All of a sudden, that blood rushes into your arms and legs, and it creates the sensation of overheating, where people have reported that they feel like they're burning up, like they're in a sauna all of a sudden, and they start, because at this point your brain is not working as well. Hypothermia really starts impacting your cognitive ability. They start tearing off their clothes to the point that on Everest and Antarctica there have been bodies found that have been almost completely nude because they were in this delirium, thought that they were boiling, burning up, and taking that. And so everything I found out about that kind of fed into how I was going to tell this story, the obstacles that I was going to put in the path of Tomas and the other Laharians as they kind of tried to solve the problem that comes up in the middle of this book. So
That's
Awesome.
crazy. As
Awesome.
local Arizonans, that sounds like the frozen stuff alone sounds like a horror film.
yeah.
I wouldn't last
Um,
literally one day in your book. I wouldn't survive.
There was that trend going around for a while on TikTok where they were like, "Would you survive in the world of your book?" And I'm just, nope, absolutely not. Like 3 minutes at best.
yeah. Oh, not even. Let's see. Diedrich, what was your favorite scene or dialogue to write? Or both?
um, it's funny. The Frostbitten has a lot of high tension scenes. Like that is the core of the book, is building that tension throughout the book. But I think my favorite scene, and the one that at the end of the day I think I'm proudest of, is a conversation between Tomas and one of the Laharians, where they're essentially talking about the difference in their experience. So Lahar is part of an empire, but they're very remote and they don't have a lot of contact with it. So technically, they're imperial citizens. They don't feel that. They don't feel that way. They don't see themselves that way. And Tomas is someone who has grown up within that imperial structure. Like, he is privileged. He grew up in the capital. He had all of the benefits of an empire, while the Laharians have had all of the negative sides of being part of an empire. And it's a conversation between the two of them about that difference in experience. Well, Tomas talks about a tornado that damaged a village and getting to see, the resources and might of an empire come to the aid of this community that suffered a huge blow, and that was why he chose to serve. And the Laharian understands that if you grow up like that, that's how you'd see it, but talks about, they mine this material. That's why Lehar's there, is this special material called aqua steel. They mine this, it all leaves. They get a fraction of the value, barely enough to survive. They have to scrape for survival. And just as soon as they start to feel like they're getting a little self-sufficient, the Empire sends this soldier, Tomas, who none of them know, and tells them, hey, he's in charge of all of you. And they said, and it's very much that contrast between those two different experiences. And that ended up being, I think, the core of Tomas's growth as a character, is coming to understand his experience was not a universal one, and that is a very big moment for him. And that was a scene that when I finished writing, I sent to a friend of mine, and because I was just so proud of the way that it turned out. I really loved that scene.
Yeah, I can see how it builds both empathy for your character, but also for the people that are where your character ends up. You know what I mean? I think that it's a very important contrast. Another contrast is, what was the most difficult dialogue or scene that you had to write?
Oh God, there's a section in the book where Tomas, he's with two other Laharians, a guy named Rafe, a guy named Derek, and the three of them have to travel 6 miles. But they have to travel 6 miles in open country, nowhere near the lava, nowhere near the vents. They have to travel 6 miles at night in this Arctic climate. And they have some special suits that kind of help keep them warm, but I figured out very quickly those suits are not going to be enough, and 6 miles suddenly becomes a pretty rough journey. But the fact was that I realized it would be a cheat to just say, we got to go 6 miles in the next chapter. Wow, that was a hard trip. We're here. Like, that's no good. But I had to figure out a way to write a chapter that is effectively them walking 6 miles. Like, nothing attacks them. Nothing. There's very little conversation because you don't talk in environments like that because it's burns your energy. And that took me a while to figure out how to make it what I want it to be. And what I finally realized was that that scene actually had the ability to be one of the key moments of the book. That this idea of the entire thing that makes Tomas special as a character is this refusal to stop. His in determination, no matter how hard it gets, to take one more step, to keep moving forward. And I realized that this could be that scene. And at the same time, I got to show this is what that kind of climate does to you. I got to show in depth how it starts breaking down a human body, a human mind, how the cold starts creeping in, getting past all their defenses, and they start going numb, the pain that they start feeling, the way that their reflexes slow down, the way their brain starts getting foggy. And it was an incredibly hard scene to write. At the end of the day, it's one of those scenes that readers tend to highlight quite a bit as one of their favorites because they said that that scene is just heartbreaking because you're just watching these characters that ideally, if I've done my job, you've come to care about, like slowly get just taken to pieces by nothing other than it's just cold. And I was very, very pleased by the end of it and how much that scene just carries huge amounts of weight, but it made me work for it. I will tell you that.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful the way that you had to both it gave you trouble, but also you were able to transform it into this chapter that told you so much about the character himself and the
Mm-hmm.
environment. So it's like this really like awesome 2-for-1 I think you figured out. And I think it's nice that you mentioned, I had difficulty with it first, but then I realized the potential of, this chapter that was giving me hell. I figured out how to make it work for me. That's really awesome, Dietrich. I like that. So which character is the one that gave you the most trouble as an author?
I was kind of thinking about that. And the funny thing is, the characters in Frostbitten came to me pretty easily. Mostly because I think I had a pretty good sense of who each of them were. I think the character I had the most amount of trouble with is probably the antagonist, and I cannot say who it is because it's kind of a little bit of a reveal near the end. But balancing, there's always a challenge, especially when you want to do a reveal at the end of a story. You have to walk a very, very careful line. So you have to provide the reader enough information so that when the reveal happens, it makes sense. Like they go, oh, nope, okay, yeah, I spotted that. But you can't give them so much that 8 chapters before they're screaming at your protagonist, like, are you an idiot? He's clearly a bad guy. Why are you doing this? Um, and that took a lot of work. I thought I'd done a decent job of it, and then I started sending it out to beta readers. And like by chapter 3, they're all like, they seem shady. And I'm like, well, okay, so not doing a great job. And then I went too far the other direction, and it seemed like it came out of nowhere. Um, that took some more. I worked with Cameron Montague Taylor, C Taylor on TikTok. Brilliant, brilliant editor. She's been my developmental editor for the last. I think I've done 3 books with her now. And she's astonishing. And she was the one who really helped me figure out how to thread that needle, how to make people feel unsettled about a character, make people still sympathize and kind of say, okay, I can kind of see where he's coming from, but simultaneously still lay all the groundwork needed so that when that reveal does happen at the end, you're like, nope, it makes sense. I see where that was coming from.
Yeah. It also kind of reminds me of Brandon Sanderson. I think it was Brandon Sanderson who had that kind of advice about twists at the end of the book. It's always, promise them, your reader, kind of like promise them like a little Hot Wheel car, but by the
Mm-hmm.
end, give them a race car or like a
Yeah.
Corvette or something like a real one. But no, that's awesome and how you handled that.
I I read there's a mystery writer, Jeffrey Deaver, who's famous for his twist endings. And he once said that his rule of thumb is if 10% of his readers figure it out, that's exactly the right number. Because that means he's done enough legwork that someone who's really paying attention can suss it out. But everybody else will suddenly be thinking, because that's what a good twist should do. It should make you think back to those scenes, think back to what they said, what they did, and go, oh, okay. It's very, very difficult to do. I think I did it pretty well with Frostbitten, but it takes a lot of work to get it there.
I'm one of those readers that would totally, like, by the end, be like, oh my gosh, and then just have to put the book down and just lay and absorb what I've just discovered. So Dietrich, your main character is not only headed toward a harrowing journey physically, but also mentally and emotionally. How did it feel to write his backstory and his struggles and his growth throughout the novel?
So Frostbitten is actually dedicated to my father, primarily because one of the more foundational moments for me was when I joined the Navy. I actually got admitted into a school that was extremely competitive. It had a failure rate of about 80%. And the first few days, they were very blunt about, hey, the vast majority of you are not going to make it through this course. It's 2 years. It's brutal. It's just the way it works. And after 3 days, I went home and I was like, that I can't. Like, I'm not going to make it. Like, I fully had intended to go in the next day. And my dad and I were not on great terms at the time. And I called my mom to talk to her. And she said, look, your father was Army for 22 years. He was special forces. He did all this. He's going to understand what you're dealing with. And we had this conversation where he explained, he was like, things like this. And I think this applies to writing a book too. But he said, things like this, if you step back and look at the whole thing, it's too big. Like, nobody can do it. Like, it's an impossible ask of a human being to do. So you can't do that. All you got to do, he's like, you got to get through tomorrow. He's like, that's all that you have to be responsible for. Just tell yourself, I'm going to get through tomorrow, and at the end of the day, I'll have this discussion again and ask myself the same question. Can I do one more day? And you just do that over and over, and he goes, that's how you make it through something like this. Just take one more step. Just one more step, then decide if you can do it again. And so very early on when I was writing this, when I was trying to figure out who Tomas was as a character, I knew that he was young. I knew he was kind of stupid. The D&D, I love the D&D breakdown. We have intelligence and wisdom. Tomas is very, very intelligent. He's not wise at all. He's very narrow-minded. He has his own perspective of the world. And I knew that a big part of his journey was going to be opening his eyes to the fact that the world was not as simple as he thought it was when he was a kid, which is something I had to deal with. I think a lot of us do when we, leave the nest and we start seeing what the world's actually like. We're like, oh, we're not ready for this. But then as I started throwing the stuff at Tomas, and I mean, Frostbitten is an ordeal. Like, I throw everything at this poor guy. I mean, I feel bad. Like, if I ever meet my characters, I'm dead. Like, he's going to beat the crap out of me. But the thing that kept coming up in my head is that this is the core of who he is. He's the guy who decides, I don't know if I can make it that 6 miles. Like, I don't know if anybody can make it that 6 miles. But I'm going to take one more step, and then I'm going to decide if I can do it again. And I'm just going to keep going. And so that conversation with my father, that philosophy, that approach to tackling something that just seems impossible really became the heartbeat of the story. And I think if the story works for people, and I've been fortunate enough to get feedback that it does, it's because of that approach, that belief that as arrogant as Tomas is at the beginning, as abrasive as he can be, that there's something powerful about seeing someone in the face of all of this going on just choose to take that one more step and keep going. So.
Yeah. What do you think Tomas, how do you think he grows across, the course of the novel? Do you think it's more of him learning that he is this, stubborn, never give up kind of person? Or do you think there's another, lesson for him as a character in Frostbitten?
The biggest lesson is he comes in with this very narrow-minded view, and this is, I wouldn't say Tomas is a self-insert, but this was very much my experience when I left home. I was sure I understood how the world worked. And then you get out and you start hearing from other people and understanding that you got to experience a very tiny sliver of what the world is. And when you start actually interacting with people who've lived a different life, it becomes very, very hard to hold on to those beliefs. And that's a hard, hard thing for Tomas, because he comes in understanding that this cause that he has pledged his life to, that he has given so much to be the representative of, is not what he thought it was. And then he has to kind of look at himself and say, okay, if that is not who I am, then all of these things I've learned, all of these things that I've been trained for, all of these things I've taken away, what can I hold on to out of that? What still can exist within me as I start to understand the world is not as simple as I thought? And ultimately it is, Tomas believes that his duty is to protect these people. His job there is to protect these people, is to guard them and to make sure that they're safe. And even as his perspective of this empire that he served is changing very, very quickly, even as he's becoming more and more disillusioned with a lot of what he grew up believing, he can hold on to that. He can hold on to, at the end of the day, protecting these people, keeping these people safe. That is a noble goal, and that is what I'm going to throw my everything into. And I think that's ultimately, like, in a story like this where a character goes through so much, I think it really is just stripping away everything extraneous until you get down to the core of who they are when they make that choice to put themselves between these people who hate him and whatever's trying to harm them. So
Yeah, he definitely sounds like a character I cannot wait to read about, because I'm really liking everything that you've described so far about his kind of stubborn nature, but it seems like there is a really good heart on the inside of that, that stubborn nature. And I think from what you've said, it sounds like he starts off kind of stumbling in it, like just being taken by the wind of like who he is as a character, and then morphing that into like a weapon that he can use. So it sounds really cool, and I can't wait to read it. But pivoting a little bit, do you listen to any music when you're writing, or do you have like a process that you go through?
I do have a process. Music is a little bit difficult. If I do, it's got to be classical ambient kind of stuff. Can't listen to anything with lyrics because it works its way in my head, and then I'm like, Tomas saw the creature emerge from the woods, and then he dropped it like it was hot. Well, okay, so that clearly wasn't supposed to be in there. Um, I like the lo-fi playlist, just something that can kind of disconnect you. My process, I am, I'm a very anal retentive person. I think part of that is just me. Part of that is having served in the Navy. Everything needs to be just so. It's very, very important. And I've carried that forward. Like, I need everything where it's supposed to be. And I've learned that I can kind of trick my brain into knowing that, okay, this is writing time. So I have a writing laptop. It's literally the only thing I do on it. It's a ridiculous waste of money. I basically bought a laptop and the only thing on it is Scrivener. Like, and the reason I've done it, I uninstalled browsers, I turned off the Wi-Fi, like I did everything, because in my mind, when I sit down and I open that machine up, then that kind of tells my brain, okay, this is what we're doing. We're setting aside the phone, we're setting aside TikTok and everything, whatever book we're reading, and we are writing right now. Does it always work? No. Sometimes I sit there and just stare at the blinking cursor and curse quite a bit. But it definitely helps put me in that headspace. And then a friend of mine got me a candle a while back that I started burning whenever I wrote. And I just went online and ordered 4 more because I found that I can't write now without that candle burning. If they ever discontinue it, then the entire series is going up in smoke. So
I
Well,
love
that's the
that.
thing too, with smell, and I feel
mhm.
like it was another podcast where I heard that, where smell is somewhere in our brains. It's very close to wherever we have our memory and things that we retain. And so I hear a lot of authors use candles, and
Mhm.
always a specific scent, because it does trigger that memory in your brain where it's like, oh, we're doing this now.
Yeah.
But so can, like, everything within your environment. So, but
I also
you
need
can.
my dog underneath my feet. Like, I don't think I can write any of my books without my 70-pound idiot dog just curled up beneath my feet because that's his spot. So
I also have a couple of writing assistants that have to. They're like quality control.
Yeah.
Dietrich, what are your publishing plans for the future, or what's ahead for your series?
So this series is I am a plotter through and through. I can't pants. The idea of doing that sends me into an anxiety spiral. And because of that, I actually have plotted out every book in the series, which is going to be 9 books. Which saying that out loud gives me a panic attack every time. But we're going to move on past that. It's going to be fine. The next book in the series, Extraction, is actually coming out on December 3rd. It is heading to ARC readers in a few weeks. The ARC applications are up and people have responded really well. It is different cast of characters set in a different part of the world, set at a slightly different time, same world. There's definitely going to be connections between them. But my goal is to release at least 1 book a year until the series is done. So it is a goal that, like, again, I have a mild panic attack whenever I think about it. But the interesting thing was, I was out to dinner the other day with a friend of mine, and I was kind of talking about how stressed that idea makes me. And she's one of my best friends. She's been reading my stuff since I wrote that first Resonant book, and she knows how many I've drafted, at least the first draft of. And she said, you've done drafts of at least 5 of these, so you've written over half of it, and that was it took me a little aback on that, but yeah, that it I don't know. I've got the story in my head. I know everything that's going to happen more or less, and yeah, we're making progress moving forward on it. In addition to that, I've got some short stories as part of a Kickstarter I did that are going to be coming out, and I really love the idea of writing small short stories to kind of flesh out the world in between each book. So I'm hoping to do some stuff like that.
Wow, that's awesome. You would absolutely hate my writing process. I think I would give you a panic attack if you just sat next to me and you're like, "So you don't have everything plotted out before you go in." And then that's when I tell you, I did actually plot it. I will use none of it. It's a good process to get things going, and by chapter 6, I will have thrown the whole thing out and lit it on fire.
Oh man, Melody Stout, who is this brilliant indie author who wrote Descendants of Merlin, which is one of the best books I read last year. She is a quilter, if you're familiar with that particular term, which is she'll plot and then she just writes whichever chapter she's feeling like at any given moment. And it makes me so angry every time she talks about it. But her books are amazing, so I guess I can't argue with it. So
Wait, so she does like any chapter, just like that she feels like
yeah.
doing? Wow.
Yeah, literally she's like, you know what? I've had a hard day. I'm going to write chapter 84 as a treat. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm going to have a stroke. And yet, like I said, Descendants of Merlin's an astonishing book. So clearly, she's doing something right. But
It's her genius process. So what made
yeah.
you choose indie publishing?
So I talked a little earlier about my brief and unfortunate experience with traditional publishing. But when I wrote Resonant, and it was just this huge doorstopper. The initial idea was, I was going to pitch this to agents, and I did send it to a few. And actually, a friend of mine, she's an agent for the Sandra Dishka agency in San Francisco, and I reached out to her, and she sent me that. She's like, 240,000 words. People aren't going to take that. She was very kind about it, but she was very upfront, and she said the additional problem is you're talking about writing a series. That's a big ask for a brand new author, which you effectively are, since different genre, different take. And I was really disillusioned, and I went on a road trip with my wife and a good friend of mine. And we were kind of just talking through that, and my wife asked me a question that really, really kind of stuck with me, which was, she goes, why are you writing these books? Like, what's important to you? And I said, I have these stories and I want to see them told. And she's like, is it important that you are seen in bookstores? Is it important? And I was like, no, I don't really care about that. And she's like, then figure out how you can achieve that goal and go from there. And the other thing is, I just started reading some indie books, and I have a deep, abiding love of indie storytelling because all bets are off. I do book reviews quite a bit on TikTok. I've started doing them on Instagram. I'm going to be releasing a few on YouTube. And I have a background in criticism from when I was a freelance journalist. And one of the best things that I've ever heard, and I take it completely to heart, was Roger Ebert saying, "I would rather see an interesting failure than a boring success." And I feel more and more often that the interesting books are the ones in indie publishing because they are the ones where no one is telling them, no, you can't do it that way. You can't, like, this is too much. This is too weird. This is too out there. And instead, they're just saying, this is a story that's important to me. This is a story I'm passionate about. And I'm going to tell it the way I think it should be told. Now, does it always work? Of course not. Like, sometimes you swing for the fences and you don't necessarily hit where you're aiming for. But consistently, over and over and over again, I have found indie publishing to be this fascinating thing. And I also love the idea that the success or failure of my book would really be dependent on what I did. Like, I got control. I got to pick who designed the cover. I got to pick how I formatted it. I get to pick all that. Does that stuff give me massive anxiety sometimes? Yes, every day, 6 times before lunch. But at the same time, Frostbitten, the success that it's found, what success it has found, is my baby. Like, I did that. I did the work to put that in, and there's a great deal of pride that I take from that. That is not to say I'm opposed to traditional publishing, and I don't begrudge anyone who chooses to go that route. Indie publishing is hard. It is a really hard thing to do, and I do not begrudge anyone who says, man, I just want to write books. I don't want to do any of that other crap. I'm going to go the traditional route. So I think it depends on everyone, but for me, it was the right fit for what I wanted out of my publishing journey. So
Yeah, I love that we can see that you grew to love indie publishing as you got into indie books and as you got your foot in the door yourself. What does indie publishing mean to you?
indie publishing is all about passion. Like, it is the thing that amazes me with every indie book that comes out is that when you look at an author that has reached the point where they're handing their book to someone else saying, this is my story, I put it together. There are a million times between that first idea where it's like, oh, what if I write a book about, a lamp that falls in love with Tuesday, whatever. It doesn't matter what the idea is. They come up with this idea. They're like, this is the idea I have for a story. To the point where they're handing it to other people, there are 1,000 different opportunities for them to quit. And most people do. Like that, we know this from their surveys out there that talk about who wants to write a book, who started writing a book. It is incredibly rare that someone starts with an idea and ends up with that finished project. And so what that tells me is that person was so passionate, so driven, so focused on this idea, on the importance of this idea going out into the world. And the fact that they're an indie publisher means that they understand in a lot of ways this is not going to be their ticket to fame and riches. They're not going to sell 1 million copies. This story is important to them. This story matters to them. And getting it out in the world becomes this driving force that is able to bowl past all of the doubts, all of the obstacles, all of the bouts of imposter syndrome that crop up and smack us upside the head, all of the formatting mistakes and hiccups that we all run into. They ran into all of those, and at no point did they say, well, I'm done, I'm out. Instead, they just kept going. And so when they hand me that book, it is more than just a story. It is the culmination of something that means something so much to that person. And I try to treat every indie book that I read with respect for that fact. Indie publishing is a passion for telling a story that I genuinely don't know can be found anywhere else. And I think that's incredibly special.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And speaking about those hiccups, what were your biggest hiccups? What were your biggest obstacles to publishing Frostbitten specifically?
um, you know, I've joked before that I feel like I kind of stumbled into Frostbitten actually coming out because I really had no idea what I was doing. I credit the TikTok, the book talk community so much with helping me find what I needed to do. I will sing Rebecca Thorne's praises till the sun is a cold, dark chunk of coal. I think she is doing just astonishing work helping people find their way. But Ingram Spark was Ingram Spark, knowing that this might come up, is the reason I got asked y'all before the podcast if I was okay to curse. Ingram Spark made me so angry. It still makes me wildly angry. Formatting issues, just the little glitches, just the things that come up between now and then. And then, I think I made 100 mistakes with Frostbitten. I didn't start talking about it early enough. I didn't continue marketing it after it came out the way that I probably should have. I think that I didn't push for ARC readers the way I wanted to. I think I didn't engage enough with things like podcasts, with things like blogs. I think I didn't do enough to help people who will love the story find the story. And I think I made a lot of right decisions, but, I think part of this process is understanding that every time you do this, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to run into hiccups. And the challenge is figuring out how to not make those same mistakes and find brand new, fun, exciting, adventurous mistakes that you can make with the next one. And it's difficult. You're going to run into those hiccups, and I ran into just so many of them. I will tell you the biggest just bad day for me. I came up with this idiotic idea to boost pre-orders for Frostbitten, where I said if I got 100 pre-orders, I was going to do the penguin TikTok dance last year in a bright pink unicorn onesie. I thought this was genius. I have no shame. I'm 45 years old. I left that back like 5 years ago, and it worked. It worked great because a couple authors, including Rebecca Thorne, picked that up, thought this was hysterical, rebroadcast it. In 4 days, I had 64 pre-orders, which for an indie author is just insane. Like, that's an amazing number. I was so excited. And I found out the hard way that because I'd put my ebook both on Ingram and on Amazon, that both versions had been available for pre-order on Amazon. And when Amazon realized that they were duplicates, they deleted Ingram's, which is where all those pre-orders were. And so I woke up one day and went from 63 pre-orders to 0.
Oh, no.
And I thought I was going to cry. I was trying to think, how do I go back out and say, so listen. And thankfully, I have made some incredibly kind and wise friends through Book Talk. I have a very strong community that I've become part of. And they're very good at telling me, all right, take a breath, go walk outside and scream at the moon for a bit, then come back in and say, you know how to plan out, you know how to strategize, you know how to solve problems, so figure out what the solution is and move forward. And so I did, and it worked out. I got back to 105 pre-orders. I had to do that stupid dance. If you're particularly masochistic, you can find it on TikTok and enjoy it. It's terrible. My dog even gets mad at me halfway through. But, I think anyone who's doing indie publishing, you're going to run into events like that. You're going to run into things that pop up like that, and they're going to break your heart, and you got to yell at the moon and then take the next step. So.
Don't we know that frustration with Ingram Spark so well?
Mm-hmm. Listen.
That's why I was cracking up. Oh gosh. Moving forward after everything you've learned, what is your best piece of advice for people who want to self-publish? Advice that you wish you had before.
I have two. One is aspirational and one is a warning. The warning is take however long you think you're going to need to publish your book and double it. Things like that, what I just brought up, they're going to happen, and they're going to throw obstacles in your way, and it's going to take time. And the worst feeling in the world is being a week away from your release and not feeling like you are prepared. The best feeling in the world, I approached Extraction very differently than Frostbitten. Extraction is good. It's set, and it's coming out on December 3rd. I have time to breathe. I have time to respond to anything that comes out, and it makes a big difference. The more aspirational thing I would say is the idea that you've got in your head that you think is too weird, too out there, write it. Absolutely, please write it. I did indie book drive a while back. If anyone saw the Twilight videos I did, that was a result of that. But one of the first things that they picked for me to do if they sold a certain number was to read and review Unhinged by Vera Valentine. And if you are unfamiliar with this book, well, go look it up. You'll understand why this is a weird book. And here's what I will tell you. That book works. It may not be my cup of tea. It may not be what I normally like, but it is a functioning, well-told story with the weirdest idea you could possibly think of. I promise you, whatever you've got in your head is not that weird. And whatever you've got in your head has the potential to be the next story that somebody falls in love with, but that's not going to happen if you don't write it. So whatever the idea is, write it. Just please. I want to read it because I love the weird ones.
Yeah,
And Unhinged
absolutely.
that's a good example for
Uh,
for that kind of advice.
I love Vera Valentine. I've gotten the pleasure of getting to know her over the last few months. She's a wonderful storyteller who I think does a better job than anyone I've ever seen of setting like the difficulty bar in like the low stratosphere where she's like, all right, let's do this, and she does it, and it's incredible. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, what can you tell us about crowdfunding? What made you choose it, and what were your pros and cons of crowdfunding?
Um. So yeah, about I'd say about 8 months ago, I started thinking about what comes next. And I knew that I had always wanted, like, I had this passion of, I've always wanted a hardcover. It's been one of my, I think all authors have the little bucket list of things that they want to accomplish. And one of mine was a hardcover, a really cool, like, special edition hardcover. Well, we're indie authors. If we're going to do something, we got to do it ourselves. And I started looking up how much that would cost. And my wife loves me very, very much, not that much. And she said, she goes, I'm very supportive, but if we're going to do this, we need to figure out a way to do it without impacting us. And so I, I had just started to get to know Paul Lafferty, the author of La Vie de Guinevere, who ran a wildly successful Kickstarter. Um, and I had talked to her and I'd said, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm thinking about doing a Kickstarter. I have no idea what I'm doing. And she was very encouraging. My writing group, very encouraging. They all had confidence that I had built up enough of a following, that I'd built up enough credibility within the community that I could make this work. And I think the biggest obstacle I had to overcome is that, and I know that I am far from the only person to deal with this. This community is so good at helping others. We are all so bad at asking for help. Like consistently across the board, someone says, I need this, and dozens flock to them. But everybody was like, no, yeah, you should do a Kickstarter. I'm like, I want to ask people for help. What's wrong with you people? That's terrible. But thankfully, I listened to people who were much smarter than me, and we launched the Frostbitten Kickstarter, and it succeeded past anything I wanted. I had a $3,500 goal, and we nearly hit $10,000. Like we came just shy of 10 grand. I was very, very happy with it. And, the two big things that I would advise someone if they're looking to do that is you're going to do a budget beforehand where you figure out, okay, I need this much to do this much to this when you're doing your stretch goals. You're not setting aside enough money. You are absolutely not. I began to have a small panic attack that we were going to hit the $10,000 number, because at that point I would do an audiobook for Frostbitten. I had committed to that, and I keep my word. And I realized I had not planned for enough money. Like that was not going to happen. I don't want to say thankfully, we didn't hit that level, and so I'm going to be able to do the audiobook in a much smarter and thought out approach, which is a hope for the future. But and then the other thing is, similar to what I said for indie publishing, however long you think it will take to fulfill your goals, triple that. I finished the Kickstarter in June, and I thought, oh, I can have the books printed and ready to go by September. No, absolutely not. The first proofs came back and they were wildly out of alignment. Second proofs came back and they clipped off like chunks of text, like going back and forth with printers, and the sheer time that it takes to go back and forth on all that stuff. And then the last thing I'll say is have faith in your backers. I when I realized I was going to have to reach out and say, it's not going to happen by September, it's probably November or December, I was terrified to send that message out. I did so because I had to, and the only responses I got were all, "Don't worry about it. We understand." We're all like, majority of the people who backed me are indie authors or support indie authors. They all know all the crap that goes into that. So, um, it was a great experience. It was a very stressful experience. I can tell a little story. The day the Kickstarter ended, my wife and I were driving to South Carolina to go to a friend, Cassie Corbin. She was doing her book launch for her debut novel, The Elemental Project, and we knew that we were going to be driving all day. We left at like 7 in the morning, and the Kickstarter ended at 5 that night. And so all of my friends got together, and they had like an intervention with me. They said, "You and your wife never get time together. You're going to be on the road together." They're like, "Here's the deal. In the morning, you're going to put your phone in the glove compartment, and you cannot look at it. You cannot think about the Kickstarter. You can't check it. Don't do it. And that night at dinner, we're all going to go to dinner together. And at dinner, you can check it then after it's finished. But you're gonna absolutely drive yourself nuts." And I was so angry at them because, of course, my wife was like, "Yep, this is the plan." Um, and so we took the whole drive, and it was the best possible thing I could have done. Although I will say, my best friend was having a lot of fun texting my wife, going, "Tell Dietrich that there's no shame in trying." Like, she was just messing with me the entire trip. But we got there, and we had dinner with my friends, and I opened it up and I saw where we'd gotten, and it was an incredible experience. So take the time to plan it, but try not to let it just absolutely consume you, because it absolutely can.
Yeah, I also did Kickstarter, and I think your advice of however much you think you're going to need more than that. That was a harsh lesson I had to learn, because as much as I made through the Kickstarter, I also feel like I put the same amount of money back in to make sure that I was fulfilling the goals that I had put on there. Because at the end of the day, like you said, you don't take into account the proof is going to cost you money. Every time you order a proof, you
Every
will
time.
have to pay every time. And so if and it's your first book, you're going to realize things go wrong a lot over and over and over. So I think I spent so much more in proofs than I ever thought I was going to spend, because things are a little bit off, and then this is a little bit off, and
Boxes. Like, you don't think about, like, you're gonna have to buy boxes to put all this stuff to ship people, and they're not cheap. Especially like my original idea, I was like, "Ooh, I'm gonna have like printed boxes, and it'll be all like
so
cool in that."
much money, so
Oh my
much
god,
money.
yeah. There are 1,000 things that are gonna add just a little bit more to that cost. So I'm debating doing a Kickstarter next year, late next year, for audiobooks, to fund audiobooks for the first two books, and I'm going to approach them completely differently, and I'll probably still make 100 mistakes, because that's what we do.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Okay, Dietrich, do you have any tips for indies about marketing? What do you think has been the biggest contributor to your success on social media?
I'll have you all drop the link for that pink unicorn onesie into the information. No, man, marketing is, I don't know. I have no. I'll be honest. I have no idea why I had found the success I have on TikTok. Why I'm finding success now on Instagram. Um, And, I have friends who I think that their videos are light years beyond mine. I think that they do a better job, they're more insightful, and for whatever reason, they don't get the engagement. I will say the biggest thing that I can say is that chasing engagement, um, that way lies madness. There are 1,000 people out there who tell you that they got the key to it. They're going to tell you that you got to start your videos this way, or you got to make sure that they're this long, or you got to post at this time of the day, or you got to make sure you spend $500 on recording gear so you're lit properly and all that kind of stuff. All of that's garbage, because the two biggest videos I have nothing to do with my writing. One was me getting very angry at putting together a book nook, and the other one was a review of the Kindle Paperwhite. I have no idea why those two blew up the way that they did. I know that a huge chunk of my current followers came from those videos. People saw it and, hey, that weird guy's funny. Follow. That's it. those people are not going to buy your book. The reality is that the connections I've made, the readers I've found, have not come from the videos that have done 100,000, 200,000, a million views. Like that's not the way it happens. They have come from me actively engaging with this community in some way or another. They have come from me approaching my content from, this is something I've learned and I think it might benefit someone else to learn. Or this is something that I'm going through and I want to share that so people know if they're going through it too, they're not the only ones. I did a series of videos on unreliable narrators, how to write different styles of unreliable narrators. I think the best performing one of those videos has 1,800 views. That's it. I know those videos have gotten me 3-4 times as many readers as the Kindle or Book Nook videos. And like I actually think this is kind of important because indie authors look at social media as their primary venue for marketing, and in a lot of ways it is. But social media has the potential to create a community of writers and uplift you and support you in ways you can't possibly imagine. I could not have done the Kickstarter without that community that I've built. I could not have found success with Frostbitten. I could not have written Extraction without that community. Extraction was a hard book to write. I don't know why, but some books come out of you eager to jump into the world, and some books are kicking and screaming and clawing at the door, and that was Extraction. And there were at least 2 times during Extraction where I wanted to scrap the whole project and move to the next one. And if I had not had the community that I do, if I had not met the people I have, if I had not connected with those who understand this challenge that we deal with, who understand the difficulties that we face as indie authors, and could listen and commiserate, but also give me a kick in the ass when I needed one, Extraction will not be coming out. And here's the thing. Extraction's a really good book, y'all. I'm really excited for people to read it. I think it's fantastic. And the copies that I've sold have come from people who saw my videos. There is a review on Amazon that I am infinitely proud of. It is a 3-star review, and it is my favorite review that I've ever gotten. The review says, I tried reading Frostbitten. It wasn't for me. Got like 30% in, and I realized it just didn't click for me. It's really well written, and I think the author really knows what he's talking about. I checked out the book because he's a really genuine guy on TikTok, and I wanted to support him. So I'm going to give the book to my brother, who I think is really going to like it. I'm going to give it 3 stars. That review, in my mind, says everything. Like, that review says that even the people who are not your target audience, they have the potential to see you as a person, see you be honest about your challenges, see you be honest about your ordeal, see you be honest about your fears and everything like that, and want to support you in some way. And sometimes that's reposting your video, sometimes that's just leaving a cool comment, and sometimes that's dropping $5 to pick up a copy of your book. So I don't know how to market books. I genuinely don't. What I can tell you is, when it comes to social media, if you focus on providing more to the community than you take, you're going to do fine. And you're going to connect with people that are genuinely going to make a big difference in your journey.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that's my biggest advice too. Morgan and I have talked about that, where we think that community is one of the most valuable resources as an indie author, not just for having people to commiserate with, but these are the people who are going to personally see to your success, because we all love each other so much in this community. We all are so willing to give. And I have not come across a single author who has gatekept anything. I have not come across a single indie author who's like,
No.
well, I'm not telling you who did my cover. I'm not telling you who did my editing. We're all like, oh, even if this person isn't taking more people for editing, I have other people I can recommend you, or here's this person who I think will be better suited to your genre. And it's such a helpful, warm little community. I adore it.
It's spectacular. The other element is that I think it really pushes you to do better, both as a creator, content creator, and as an author. Like, as you meet more people, you start to understand more. Like, you expand your idea of what can be done out there. I never would have done Kickstarter if it hadn't been for meeting Paula Lafferty. I will say, So I log every book that I read, and I have not done the review for this yet because it doesn't come out until December. It has the same release date. But the best book I've read this year is by Kate Page, which everyone should be following Kate Page. She's
I
an
love
absolute
Kate.
delight. Yeah, she's amazing. I've gotten to read the book Funny Girl, which comes out on December 3rd. Funny Girl is so far outside of my normal genre. I don't read romance. I'm not familiar with romance, and Funny Girl is a romance. I never would have read Funny Girl if I hadn't gotten to know Kate, gotten to know the kind of person she was, gotten to hear from her videos about the journey that she went through, the difficulties she faced, the challenges, the doubts, all of the things that went into that book. It made me want to read the book. It made me want to see what came out of this passion, like I talked about at the beginning. And I read Funny Girl in 5 hours and 10 minutes. And it is the best book I've read this year, traditional, indie, anything. It is astonishing. And I am grateful every day that I engage with Kate on this platform, that I engage with you, Jade, that I engage with Mel, that I engage with all these different people, because it has exposed me to so many types of books that I never would have read. And it has taught me so much about this craft that we are all so passionate about that I never would have learned without it. And yeah, this is just my short version of saying everybody needs to buy Funny Girl. It is ridiculously good. So yeah.
I've been looking forward to it.
Awesome.
I've been following Kate for a really long time, so I've been wanting to read it, and I know that she's got the cover and all of that now, and she's starting to get things situated after so much trouble and so much difficulty. So,
Listen, she's going to be so mad at me because she gets embarrassed anytime I talk about her book, but I don't care. Yeah, it's brilliant. So
well, thank you so much for the amazing interview. We've had a great time having you on here. I just want to wrap up with any future goals or upcoming events that you are really excited about and want to mention before we end things up here.
future goals and upcoming events. As I said, Extraction comes out on December 3rd. I'm very excited about it coming out, mostly because that means I'm done writing it. But it is a fantasy heist set in the same world as Frostbitten, but on the other end of the continent. It is about two thieves that are tasked with stealing a vial of bull semen, and it it's a good book. I'm very excited for people to read it. It is not as lighthearted as that might make it seem. It is still a fantasy thriller, and I'm very proud of that fact. Um, and then past that, I've been scripting out and recording videos, and I'm going to be setting up on YouTube soon, doing longer form content. I'm doing a variation of the Twilight videos I put out there. I've got some reviews of some books coming up, as well as some content on writing and how to navigate indie books in general. So I'll be putting out information about that as it comes up. And other than that, I'm just going to keep writing books, and hopefully I'll get to keep meeting other amazing authors like y'all. So
Awesome. Remind us where we can buy your book.
Amazon's the easiest place, but you can get it. It is distributed through Ingram Spark now, so most bookstores can order it for you if you'd like. I will say that next month I'm launching my author website, which is something I'm way behind on, but you will be able to get signed copies through there, as well as DRM-free EPUBs of Frostbitten and then Extraction when it comes out through there as well. But Amazon's the easiest way. So yeah.
All right. And what are those social media handles so people know where to find you?
They're easy to find. I'm at Dietrich Stogner on both TikTok and Instagram, and it's going to be the same one on YouTube when that kicks off. So
Awesome. Awesome. And Morgan, do you have any updates you want to give before we end the podcast up?
It's for Morgan, yeah. The Maiden's Husband did just come out last month, and so I'm still recovering from that.
congratulations.
Thank you. And then, just to cope with that, you just write some more. So I have The Healer's Wife, which is a free short story that's going to be on my newsletter soon. And then I'm scheduling for book 2 in the Matriarch Chronicles, which follows The Maiden's Husband. So I won't reveal anything yet, but scheduling is happening.
Awesome. Yeah. And then as for me, it's been a little over a month and a half since Fate's Tether released. Trying to work on the next book, but we'll see how that one keeps coming out of me. I did want to mention that I am going to be at Readers of the Valley, January 18th and 19th in Glendale. Tucson Festival of Books, March 15th and 16th in Tucson, Arizona. And then Morgan and I will both be at Tea and Tropes, The Enemies to Lovers, and that's going to be May 9th and 10th in Mesa, Arizona. Our next episode is going to have Zaylin Flynn and Megan Turner, who are the authors of To Be Damned. And once again, thank you so much, Dietrich, for coming out here and being on our podcast and being our first guest. We've loved having you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute blast, and I'd love to come back sometime in the future.